Hey everybody, TacticAngel back on the PlayStation 5 to take a look at another premium ship in World Warships Legends. This time we'll be looking at the Leipzig, a Tier 6 premium German light cruiser. For this review, I'll start with some history, move into analysis, discuss commanders, then run down the stats, then we'll finish off with some gameplay. If you want to skip around at all, you should see some time codes in the description to help you out. As far as the Leipzig goes, the story begins with the Königsberg class. For context, however much these ships may be enjoyable to play in-game, they were the first modern, turreted cruiser design developed by the German Reichsmarine, the interwar German Navy. Though a reasonably maneuverable ship and pretty fast for a ship her size when she was built, her all-welded hull was prone to damage in the high seas and had peculiar handling characteristics due to weight distribution, not just the staggered turrets, but also fore and aft, and she could be prone to rolling over. Not fantastic in general, and doubly so if one of the principal places you'd be expected to operate this ship was the North Sea. One would imagine that, even before being shot at, the Reichsmarine was aware that the protection of the Königsberg class was relatively light as well. The Leipzig class was intended to address several of these issues, including a revised bow shape, and very obviously, all of the turrets are now on the center line. A lot of the issues with the hull strength and protection could be made up by the 2,000 or 3,000 extra tons these ships had over the Königsbergs. I say a range there because the class consists of two ships, the Leipzig and her sister, the Nürnberg, but they were built to slightly different designs, with Nürnberg actually being 11 meters longer, among a few other structural differences. I guess this has led some people to arguing that these ships are in different classes, and while it's not a non-insignificant difference, the differences here are pretty small versus some other classes that call much more different ships their sisters, and both of these cruisers sprung out of the same program, so we're just going to go with that. Leipzig was laid down in April 1928, launched in October 1929, and was commissioned into service 2 years later. Her pre-war service was basically training in the North Sea, visiting several places including Great Britain, alongside Königsberg as part of the first goodwill visit since World War I. She also spent most of a year conducting patrols as part of the non-intervention agreement during the Spanish Civil War. Non-interventionist here meaning effectively a third-party blockade by a coalition of navies. But as it would turn out, goodwill was a limited-time offer. Leipzig was in the Baltic alongside Köln, and Nuremberg attempting to prevent the escape of Polish warships. They were to square off with the ORP Börse, Błyskawica, and Gram, but the crafty Poles had slipped through the Øresund under the cover of darkness 2 days earlier. She'd stick around the gaps between Scandinavian nations through the end of the year, playing escort to battleships and mine layers alike, though not without drawing some attention. On December 14th, she'd come under attack by 20 Wellington bombers, and though between Leipzig and Nuremberg they'd claim 6, the engagement would still send her back to port for some repairs, before becoming a training ship for most of 1940. She'd lose one of her torpedo launchers on each side of the ship in order to arm Gneisenau. So you can take the ship's appearance in the game as, obviously, at the beginning of the war. For those of you wondering about the Nuremberg, which would become the Makarov, likewise, she lost 2 of her torpedo tubes to a Krupp Scharnhorst, and not specifically due to Soviet incompetence. She was back in service in order to support some of the German advance during Operation Barbarossa, though not for very long. Off the coast of Gotenhafen, modern-day Gdynia, in heavy fog, she was accidentally rammed by the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen. Pictured here, with the red, white, and black whirligig of unfriendliness censored to make YouTube happy, I guess. Prinz Eugen was making about 20 knots and didn't come too far from slicing Leipzig straight in half. What she did do is end up flooding Leipzig's engine rooms and causing 39 casualties. Leipzig would have to be towed back to Gotenhafen, where she was more or less deemed unrepairable, which didn't quite end her service history, but certainly did as far as being an effective surface combatant. She'd sit in dry dock for the next few years, when she'd limp back to Hela, transporting refugees and avoiding several attacks from aircraft and submarines along the way. Once there, she'd serve as a barrack ship and technically outlive the war. Given her state, she wasn't worth being taken as a war prize and instead was scuttled in July 1946. Leipzig enters World Warships Legends as, surprisingly, a Tier 6 cruiser, one tier up from where Nuremberg sits. I assume that's for one of a couple reasons, the first of which is hardly anyone actually likes the York, or possibly because it means that it will bring in more doubloons. And there may be other reasons. Regardless, some of the things that Leipzig has going for it are the typical German benefits: improved sonar performance, high AP shell damage, and quarter penetration with HE shells. That doesn't change just because this is a premium ship, and in fact, you get access to all of the consumables Nuremberg has options to get, but you don't get to make any choices. What's a bit surprising on Leipzig is that you get this on a ship that is actually reasonably stealthy, and though you might find the speed of the torpedoes on this boat a little lacking, Leipzig easily has the capability of firing torpedoes at targets beyond its detectability. And obviously, the most dangerous torpedoes are the ones you aren't expecting. All of this isn't necessarily traded away for what is a catastrophically frail ship, because Leipzig is more or less the not particularly well-defended Tier 5 light cruiser, just enjoying all the things that come from being placed up a tier. The results might be the same though. If you get shot by a battleship, it's time to start praying. If a carrier wants you, he can get you, and maybe your consumables will make that look a bit more expensive to him, but that's a view from sea level. From the sky, you're much more likely to find this ship not very intimidating. That basically means that people who are going to enjoy the Leipzig are largely those folks not prone to making a lot of mistakes. In fact, my sense is this ship is most likely to appeal to people who feel the München is just too durable, too easy to play, and want a challenge. Possibly have forgotten that ship exists at all, but it may also appeal to the more torpedo-minded cruiser players. As we come to commanders, you do have some legitimate choices here. The most obvious choice is probably to focus on those guns, and Karl von Müller is going to give you the highest fire chance, or good fire chance plus some range, but whatever you choose, the chance to fire faster. Provided you get your fires, you're going to end up with the greatest damage over time potential with him. Throw on some range and rate of fire, and this choice probably works best so long as you arrive on a map with suitable islands and teammates that are willing to spot for you. Lutyens can't exactly change your reliance on the blues out there to help you out, but he does offer you some damage reduction and the ability to realize when you're not just spotted but actually being targeted. By and large though, I think he'll end up doing the best to make this feel just a bit more responsive, making the loss of 360 turrets less notable with fast turret traverse, as well as several abilities, including his base trait. Unfortunately, that leaves you with your inspiration and a maximum 2% potential increased fire chance to juice your damage. Where Reinhardt's share may come up is that he gives you the opportunity to really sit pretty comfortably in the middle ground, while also improving your sea detectability. Though it is not unique to Leipzig, if you're this fragile, it is always important to remember the best way to survive an experience is not to get shot. In any case, the options you get with Scheer are nothing special, but for Leipzig, it may be a very happy middle ground. As we talk about stats, everything you'll see on screen is stock, I think. And even if Nuremberg is a tier down, you're liable to hear a lot about it for the next few minutes, unless you skip ahead. Survivability in Leipzig, as already stated, is not its strong suit. Sure, it picks up an extra 3,800 hit points over Nuremberg, but Leipzig falls about 10% short of the average at Tier 6. Nuremberg's 13 to 100 millimeters of armor isn't particularly effective at Tier 5, and having at least nominally less at Tier 6 is unsurprisingly less enjoyable. Now, the loss of 3 points of armor on the superstructure isn't actually a functional difference, though it might rack up a few more overpens from small caliber AP shells, and the forward exposed citadel is actually a little smaller on Leipzig. You're going to be shot at by more numerous, generally larger guns, which means that these hit points tend to disappear pretty quick with what is effectively a non-functional turtleback. It may also not surprise you that a 4% torpedo protection is not very good. Leipzig has the same 3x3 turret arrangement that everyone is familiar with from Nuremberg. But if you can't quite sort out what feels different about Leipzig, it's that these formerly very flexible 360 turrets on the back of the ship now have to go the long way around. Turret rotation is slightly better than average, 22.5. When they're on target, they do have slightly better firing angles than her sister ship, so it's marginally better at charging down victims, but otherwise these will feel pretty similar, and are set up in the same arrangement convenient for a ship that would probably prefer to run away. 14.9 kilometer range isn't bad, 6 seconds on the reload is same as Nuremberg, and the extra 50 damage for both HE and AP are hardly going to be noticeable. Your 8% fire chance will give you just about an average fire starting ability over time, and you come just short on the average DPM. It's actually quite a bit better than it sounds thanks to the improved penetration of your HE shells, which is probably where you're going to be spending most of your time. The torpedoes on Leipzig are very atypical though. 2 sets of 3 isn't strange, the 10 kilometer range is though. Unsurprisingly, for longer range torpedoes, these are a bit slow at 59 knots. The 1.2 kilometer detectability gives your targets about a half a second less time to dodge. The damage is relatively low, but also low is your reload, at just 68 seconds. If you can find a way to make these work, Leipzig does have among the best torpedo damage over time at the tier. If you've skipped ahead to the consumables for this ship, you might expect that Leipzig is the German answer to the Atlanta or Takachi, the latter of which isn't actually an outstanding AA ship, but the Leipzig falls short of even that. The 28 rating on its own doesn't mean much, but it is the worst at the tier by a comfortable margin. It owes that poor rating to a max range of just 4 kilometers, where it does nearly no damage. You pick up a few more guns at 3.5 kilometers, which also do nearly no damage, and then finish that off with a little more nothing at 2 kilometers. Now, the one saving grace I will say about the armor scheme that we didn't talk about earlier is so far, neither the Enterprise nor any German carrier has citadeled me so far in this, so maybe it's difficult, but it is otherwise very vulnerable from the sky. Maneuverability, on the other hand, is pretty average. 33 knot speed and 700 meter turning circle is pretty typical for tier 6 cruisers. The rudder shift is the only thing that's really any good here, but you're probably not fast enough or turning tight enough to really make this an incredibly agile ship. And though not amazing, the concealment on Leipzig is pretty good. It's about a half kilometer beneath average, and if you put any focus on your concealment, you can easily stealth launch torpedoes against battleships and other cruisers. You should still plan to lose the spotting game against really sneaky boys, think Royal Navy and the Italians, which is also a Royal Navy, I guess, but you know what I mean. Visibility from the air is about the same thing, third a kilometer below average, and firing from smoke is almost as good as you can expect from a cruiser. And coming to consumables, the short story is that your damage control is normal, your sonar is normal, at least for a German cruiser, and that is a tier 6 German cruiser to be clear. Then, where folks on PC would have had to choose between having a fighter aircraft or defensive fire AA, you get both. Though to keep with tradition, still neither of them are likely to really help you all that much, because 2 times nothing is pretty much nothing, and your fighter, while better, is still piloted by, well, somebody not great at shooting other planes down. And with all of that out of the way, we're gonna get into some gameplay. We're gonna be in Scandinavia. It makes sense. We're gonna go ahead and put our commander up on the screen right away, and I will mention that this is a case of do as I say, not as I do. You can see we are using Maximilian von Spee. Why? Because we were thinking maybe we can make this into a torpedo boat. And I was thinking maybe I could save myself the time in animating this nifty thing that I do for the commander section. But clearly that didn't work. So this is all really an experiment to see if trading off what you get with a real cruiser commander can be made up for by increased torpedo range, beyond your visible detectability, and maybe a little extra reload. You know, I like to fool around, and this seemed like a fun match to show off because there are some strengths and there are some weaknesses, and that's what we like out of a review. We will go ahead and kind of play the island game. You can see we're waiting for the game to develop a little bit. We've got a Lyon out there. Getting into position, a New Orleans. The Wichita CE, which I think is not as good as the Wichita, for the record, is pushing this side a little bit, and then there is one extra battleship in A. I want to say that's a Bismarck. In any case, we're trying to get around to the point where we can make these shots over the hill. I guess you'd call it an island, or a bluff. Is that a bluff? It looks like a bluff. In any case, we got lots of fun words for these things in English, and we're shooting over the bluff, getting some decaps. Bismarck B, totally different ship than what I said, is coming around. And one of the nice things about the quick loading torpedoes is that in theory we can use these for sort of area control. And we are hoping that the Bismarck plays like your average German battleship, even though it is kind of peak German battleship in the way people play it, which is to say they like to throw on a lot of secondaries on that boat and then just drive right at your face. It doesn't quite look like that's what he's doing. This is a little bit dangerous because somebody might do what the Wichita did and have his guns pre-trained on us. Thankfully, he's shooting HE. And he's taking kind of a pretty good punishment for this. We're getting some spots while getting some damage out there. Now, every one of these shells is going to be a little bit less effective than it could be, because if we were playing with someone other than Maximilian von Spee, we'd have a higher fire chance, so maybe he'd already be burning to death by now. I'm not sure that's really going to change how the game goes for him. He's being shot by enough stuff that he goes down. We've gotten some spotting XP there, even though there's no way to tell that in the game. And also we've gotten about 14,000 damage off of a higher tier ship. Not too terrible. Not a bad trade for about 4,000. Yeah, really closer to 5,000 that we took. Got an extra battleship coming around. Zinop is outside of our range. That is another potential issue with building a ship like this, is that we're pretty much stuck with what we started out with. If we were a little bit closer to that smoke screen, or when I say a little bit closer, I mean in it, we could tell how long we've got. I'm going to trust that we have several seconds, and we're going to try to pay a little bit of attention to see when it starts disappearing on the edges. For right now, it's kind of functioning like an island. It won't block torpedoes, but it is allowing me to put some shells out there on the Lyon without, receiving any in return. This is standard fire starter stuff. This is pretty much the bread and butter of what this ship does, unless you try to build it for torpedoes. And we do finish him off. Now this is going to be a little bit cheeky. We probably legitimately just missed the smoke screen, but it does also look like it might be starting to dissipate. That is going to open us up to a little bit of damage. We took, I think, one shell there. It looks like it probably came in our upper belt, went straight through that paper thin turtleback and right into our citadel. So that took about half of our life. And obviously you can see how if Sinop had hit maybe twice, that would have been a really big problem. Now those shells don't look like they're going to hit me. That is very confident. Anyway, you can see we put some area denial torpedoes out here. Hopefully Bismarck doesn't realize how long range those torpedoes are, and in this case them being slower might give me a few more seconds for him to drive into them. It looks like he's a bit uninterested. And we can already tell something's kind of gone awry because we are spotted and all of the line of sights don't make a lot of sense. My guess would be that the destroyer that we know is out there is probably coming up through this position on the map. And so, the fact that we became unspotted there means that he's probably even more inside. So maybe there instead. We're going to put out some more area denial torpedoes. And I'm actually going to turn around here. The two battleships, I think, are a bit more concerning to me at the moment than the destroyer. There's the destroyer's torpedoes. He is out to our left. If we're lucky, we'll lose our spot because he goes all the way around the island. There we go. So it's possible now he's going around the east side of B, which would be really, really nice. And that's kind of what we hope, because though we are a light cruiser, we've got one forward gun, we've got two in the back. They don't have fantastic angles, so it is a bit more challenging to run down a destroyer in this. And now Bismarck is just kind of hiding from everybody. Anchorage has thankfully laid another smoke screen. Thankfully in the sense that I'm not being shot at the moment or spotted. Unfortunately, it also means nobody's spotting anything. Looks like Bismarck B has prioritized me, maybe, as its target, because those secondaries are shooting at me instead of the closer Anchorage. Maybe I should thank him for his support. Thank you for subscribing. I do sometimes like it when people watch my videos. You know, when I actually decide to make them. And this should more or less finish off Bismarck. And as you can see, the points game, we're winning. The cap game, we're not exactly winning. But realistically speaking, killing this last destroyer isn't necessarily required. And he can't be in two places at once, so he will lose the game, more or less. At this point, what I'm doing is driving straight forward in one direction, and we're going to make adjustments to where we're going every 5 or 10 seconds, hoping that he thinks that we've settled on something, but he pops out before then. I'm a little bit surprised about that. I'm not fast enough to run him down, so he must have been very confident in where I was going. And then, of course, we finish off the game with just the front guns. They still do HE damage. They still pen plenty if you're talking about a destroyer. And that finishes off the game for us. Part of the reason I chose this is I didn't hit any torpedoes in this game, and that is kind of the danger in building a ship like this for torpedoes. I have had several games where I've hit upwards of half a dozen times, but it feels like it's safer to go with the fire. In any case, my closing thoughts on Leipzig. You know, you never really quite know what you've lost until you find yourself shooting at a Weimar. And though I never cared all that much for that ship, it was at that precise point I realized I'd rather be in a München. Now, I'm not saying I didn't enjoy my time in Leipzig, but it's very much a walking on eggshell sort of ship. And if that's your thing, find a nice island to make your accomplice, or to use those long-range torpedoes to your advantage, then this ship will be fine. But I like to mix it up a bit more than you can in Leipzig. I don't think it quite plays like a Japanese torpedo cruiser, even if you want to try to lean into this. It's more fragile than probably all of those. For better or worse, I think this is mostly just a novelty, something to have fun with in a standard game, and probably not very competitive anywhere else. But those are just my thoughts. Let me know what yours are down in the comments. Hope you've enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll see you on the next one.